I remember the way her laughter soared over the pounding bass, cutting through the swirl of neon lights like a spotlight. That night in the club is carved into my mind with cruel precision. Even now, I can almost taste the thick haze of sweat and perfume on my tongue. It was supposed to be our escape, a simple evening of drinks and dancing. I'd taken her there a few times before. It was one of those places we pretended made us feel younger. At the time, watching her sway to the music, hips loose, hair shining under the pulsing strobes, was my private delight. Now that memory feels like a needle stabbing beneath my ribs, each beat of recollection drawing fresh blood. I stood by the bar, nursing something watery that claimed to be a scotch, stealing glances at Emily in the crowd. She wore a slim black dress that hugged her figure, matching heels that gave her an extra inch of confidence. Whenever she smiled, I felt the old stirrings of pride, of something primal that said, "She's mine." As I leaned in to order a second drink, my eyes darted up, and that's when I saw him. A stranger back then, but not anymore. Mark Hensley. He was tall, with the lean sort of build that spelled out confidence in every gesture. His hair was cropped, his grin a glint of arrogance in the flicker of the club lights. He moved close to Emily, an arm sliding around her waist as though it belonged there. At first I told myself I was imagining it, the way her body arched toward him, how her hand fell on his shoulder so naturally. Something in me wanted to believe it was just a harmless dance, a random moment in a neon-soaked world. But then she looked at him with a familiarity I'd never witnessed before in all our years together. It wasn't just the typical flirtation we sometimes indulged in for a little excitement. This was deeper, heavier, as though they shared a secret language. And I felt my chest tighten. I thought to step forward, to break the moment, to reclaim her by my side. But some thick hesitation got caught in my throat. My mind buzzed with questions. What the hell is going on? Who is he? Why do they look so intimate? My heart hammered, but my legs felt made of lead. In a single sweep, I realized something was wrong. Something was very wrong. She glanced in my direction. Her eyes flickered with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Maybe panic, maybe guilt. I lifted my drink, trying to cover the knot forming in my gut. Then she whispered something in the stranger's ear, and they both vanished into the throng of dancers. One moment she was there, the next they were gone, swallowed by the chaotic swirl of bodies. I should have followed. Every instinct in me screamed to track them through the pulsating crush of clubbers. But I froze, uncertain of my own place, or maybe just afraid of what I might see. By the time I set my drink down and forced my way through the dancing crowd, they'd slipped away, leaving me with too many questions. Emily never mentioned it the next day. She never said a word about her disappearance or who that man was, and a stupid part of me wanted to believe it never happened at all. Even so, that memory festered. It was like an invisible crack in the foundation of our marriage. I tried to carry on, and for a while, I managed to push the image to the back of my mind. But the doubt never left. When the phone rang late one night, and some strange man with a hoarse voice asked me about a fare that wasn't paid, I almost hung up. It was past midnight, my mind foggy with sleep. On the other end of the line, the taxi driver apologized for calling so late. He said he was trying to track down a woman who looked exactly like my wife. Someone who'd hailed him from downtown, demanded to be taken to the far outskirts of the city, then hopped out without settling the bill. He muttered something about accidents happen, but I can't afford to lose money, and asked if I knew anything about it. I rubbed my face, confusion mixing with annoyance. I started to say he must have the wrong number, or that he'd made a mistake. But then he offered a detail that punched the air from my lungs. He heard the man waiting for her call her name. Emily. And that man's voice had rung out so casually, so familiarly, that the driver assumed they lived together. But the passenger, the woman, insisted the driver keep going until they reached a small, isolated road near a line of old warehouses. After that, the man didn't see her pay or say goodbye. She just vanished with the guy who called her by name. My blood turned to ice. Memories of that club scene snapped into place. What did he look like? I asked, my throat dry. The driver didn't know. All he had was a general description. Tall, athletic, maybe mid-30s. Possibly older, but with that kind of effortless youth men like me had begun to envy. All I could do was stand there, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the driver's story unravel any sense of security I'd clung to. And in the background, I heard a faint voice calling her name, muffled but distinct, like the driver had taped the call or was replaying something. Emily, the voice said, half laughing, half impatient. Suddenly I was in that club again, watching them slip away. My heart thundered. I thanked the driver absently. I promised to sort it out. Then I sank into an armchair, the phone dangling from my limp hand. Anger, humiliation, fear, these emotions battered me all at once. My knees shook as I tried to stand. I felt stuck, paralyzed by the brutal confirmation that my worst suspicions were true. Morning found me numb. I'd barely slept, my mind a roiling sea of questions and half-formed accusations. Emily woke in her usual way, calm, stretching, planting a light kiss on my cheek. I stared at her, wondering how she could act so normal when our entire marriage teetered on the brink of collapse. But I said nothing. I couldn't speak the words yet. I got dressed, the world around me feeling oddly surreal. That's when I did something that even now, I can't fully explain. I went to a monument maker, a place on the edge of town where people choose headstones for lost loved ones. In a haze, I told the craftsman I wanted a ring-shaped stone, a closed loop of polished granite. I had him inscribe just my initials, JB, on its smooth face. My voice was steady, betraying none of the emotional storm raging inside. I needed that ring as a symbol, a final marker for something that felt like it was dying inside me. My life as I knew it had looped in on itself. Everything ended where it began. When the man asked me who it was for, I just said, for me. He looked at me like I was unhinged, but he didn't press. And I walked out, my mind spinning with the inexorable finality of what I'd just done. That evening, I sat across from Emily at our kitchen table. The overhead light was harsh, illuminating every flicker of doubt in her eyes. She tried small talk, asked about my day, the weather, whether I'd pay the electric bill. Mundane questions, answered with curt nods. My heart hammered against my ribs. My mouth went dry. Then, with shaky hands, I pulled out my old recorder, set it on the table, and clicked it on. She blinked. "What's this?" she asked softly. I said nothing. The tape ran, capturing the hush between us. Eventually, she spoke again, a hesitant confusion in her tone. She asked if I was upset, if something had happened at work. Her voice quivered with the tension that was thick in the air. I let her talk. She filled the empty space with short phrases, apologies for snapping at me last week about the groceries, confessions that she'd been feeling off lately, excuses about her late nights out, a flurry of half-baked justifications. "I'm sorry if I've been distant," she whispered, tears glinting in her eyes. I stared, silently. My jaw felt locked. Eventually, she demanded I tell her what this was all about. "Why are you doing this?" she repeated, her voice climbing an octave. But I just listened, letting her run in circles until she exhausted herself. In total, I counted about 60 phrases, 60 disjointed remarks, pleas, half-lies, or half-truths. When she finally fell silent, trembling, I reached for the recorder. I pressed play on a short clip I'd prepared. My own voice, raw with anger, crackled through the tiny speaker. Not a single truth. That was it. 4 words. Her eyes went wide, a sheen of terror crossing her face. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I stopped the recording, letting the quiet settle like dust after a demolition. 1,000 questions circled my mind. Why him? Why now? Did you ever love me? But I kept them locked behind my teeth. Emily pleaded for answers, begged me to say what I was thinking. I offered her nothing. The tension in the room was suffocating, and yet in some twisted way, I felt a surge of power in my silence. I'd wrested control back, even for a moment. She was the one adrift now, forced to confront her own guilt without any guiding script. That night, she lay beside me in bed, so still it almost felt like she wasn't breathing. Eventually, her exhausted body claimed sleep. Her hand brushed against my arm, as if seeking comfort from the man she'd so thoroughly betrayed. She must have assumed that my silence meant I would stay, that we'd simply fight through this. In the darkness, I stared at the ceiling, my mind churning with every possible scenario, every possible revenge, every possible outcome. The memory of that club, the phone call, the ring-shaped tombstone. I felt them all swirling inside me. My life, my marriage, my sense of self, they'd all turned to quicksand. Before dawn, I slipped out of bed. I moved carefully, so as not to wake her. She looked peaceful in sleep, lips parted slightly, hair spread across the pillow. There were still tear tracks on her cheeks. For a second, a wave of regret threatened to break my resolve. But the phone call's echo crashed through my mind. That strange man's voice saying her name so intimately. Then the image of them dancing, her body pressed to his. It reignited the blaze of anger that had become my new heartbeat. I threw some clothes into a duffel bag, pocketed my wallet, and stepped out into the pre-dawn chill. The sky was barely graying, the streetlights still humming in the gloom. My hands trembled around the steering wheel as I pulled away from the curb. I didn't look back at the house. The knot in my chest felt like a physical weight, a chunk of stone lodged behind my ribs. When Emily woke, she'd find my side of the bed empty. Indeed, my entire presence wiped out. She'd see the closet missing half its contents, a few basic items from the bathroom gone. She'd realize this was more than a lover's quarrel. It was the end of something that once felt unbreakable. I wanted her to feel that hollowness as acutely as I had when the taxi driver's voice confirmed my worst fears. But that was just the beginning of my slow-burning revenge, the first step in reclaiming my own sense of dignity. It wasn't about punishing her physically, or even humiliating her. It was about freeing myself from the crippling sense of betrayal, about making sure she understood that the life we had was dead. In that sense, the monument I'd ordered was more than a bizarre whim. It was a gravestone marking the death of us. I drove until sunrise painted the sky in pale blues and pinks, merging onto a highway that stretched into the horizon. Each mile gave me space to think, to question. Anger tangled with heartbreak, forming a vicious storm in my chest. The dull roar of the engine became a lullaby to my chaotic thoughts. You can't run from it forever, my mind whispered. Eventually you'll have to face her, face him, face yourself. But for the moment, I needed the open road. I pulled into a diner a few hours later, some nameless spot off the interstate. The aroma of stale coffee and frying bacon wrapped around me like a blanket. An older waitress, hair pinned in a neat bun, offered a sympathetic smile. Maybe she recognized the lost look in my eyes. I chose a corner booth, as far from the other patrons as possible, and stared at the menu without really seeing it. There was a time I would have texted Emily from a trip like this, letting her know I was safe. She'd have teased me about the grease I was about to eat, told me to be careful. But now, even the thought of contacting her churned my stomach. The memory of her standing so close to him, the phone call, that ring of betrayal, it all seared through me again. I sipped my coffee, black, trying to gather the shards of my life into something coherent. I knew I couldn't stay on the run forever. That day, or maybe the next, I'd have to turn around and go back. Not to her, not to us, but to handle the practicalities. Bank accounts, property, divorce. The bitterness of that word clung to my tongue, but behind the bitterness was a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I understood exactly where I stood. The illusions were gone. After the diner, I found a cheap motel. The sign outside flickered with half-burnt neon letters. I paid for a single night, though I had no idea if I might stay longer. The room was small and smelled faintly of mildew, but it offered me 4 walls where I could collapse. I laid on the stiff bed, recalling each moment that led me here. My mind drifted to the ring-shaped monument again, the bizarre finality of it. Maybe I'd have it placed in a graveyard or a memorial park. Maybe I'd stash it in storage. I wasn't even sure what I intended. I only knew it was a symbol I needed. Somewhere between the hum of the air conditioner and the throbbing in my temples, I dozed off. When I woke, it was nearly sundown. My phone buzzed with messages and missed calls. As expected, Emily's name filled the screen. I swiped them away without reading. The time for explanations, if such a time would ever come, was not now. Something told me she was probably frantic, terrified I was gone forever, or worse, planning some spectacular vengeance. She wasn't entirely wrong. I stepped outside, letting the cool evening air wash over my face. A lonely vending machine glowed by the motel's office, offering stale candy bars and watery sodas. I punched in coins for a Coke, then paced the cracked asphalt. A single question wouldn't leave my head. Who was I without her? For more than a decade, I'd considered Emily part of my identity, part of my reason for being. Now I was severed from that bond. I realized I could do anything, go anywhere. The freedom felt terrifying and exhilarating. In the hush of that evening, I remembered the way she'd talk in her sleep sometimes, murmuring nonsense that made me smile in the dark. I remembered the sparkle of her eyes the day we got married. I remembered the first time she told me she loved me, and how it was awkward and wonderful all at once. Each recollection was now laced with the knowledge that she'd given herself to another man, that her loyalty was not what I believed it to be. My heart clenched, the scabbed-over wound ripping open again. Late that night, a new thought formed in my mind. It started as a whisper, then became a thunderous resolution. I needed to confront Mark Hensley, face to face. I needed to see the man who shattered my life, who had the arrogance to stand beside my wife in that club, his hand on her waist as though I didn't exist. I wasn't going to start a brawl or do anything reckless, but I had to look him in the eye. Because in a way, confronting him was the next step toward freeing myself. I scrolled through my phone, ignoring Emily's messages, focusing on the bits of information I'd gleaned from the taxi driver. The outskirts. The old warehouses. Maybe Mark worked there, or maybe he just used the area as a convenient hiding spot for their rendezvous. I sat in the half-lit motel room, adrenaline buzzing through me. The idea of seeing him face to face made my palms sweat. But the alternative, never seeing him, leaving it all in the realm of nightmares, felt worse. At dawn, I checked out of the motel, slinging my bag over my shoulder. This time, I didn't feel the same aimless desperation. I had a purpose, a plan. Even if it was fueled by anger and heartbreak, at least I was moving forward. I found myself driving back toward the city, my knuckles white on the wheel. I arrived at the industrial outskirts late in the morning. Cracked pavement, rusted chain-link fences, looming warehouses with peeling paint. The air smelled of dust and diesel. It didn't take me long to find a small cluster of buildings that looked like they might house small businesses or private workshops. A battered sign read Hensley Automotive in faded letters. I felt my heart thump as I pulled up. There was a single car parked out front, a sleek black convertible that looked out of place in the gritty surroundings. I cut the engine and stared at the building, half expecting to see Mark stroll out at any second. My stomach churned with nerves. But the memory of Emily's betrayal spurred me on. I pushed open a door marked Office. Inside, the reception area was small. A desk, a couple of chairs, a battered couch, and posters of classic cars. The place smelled faintly of motor oil. At first, there was no one behind the desk. Then a tall figure emerged from a back room, wiping grease from his hands on a cloth. It was him. Mark Hensley looked up, brows knitting together in a polite frown. "Can I help you?" he asked in a voice that seemed too casual, too calm. The same voice I remembered from that phone call's background. I must have stared, unable to speak. A flicker of recognition passed over his face, but I wasn't sure if he remembered seeing me at the club, or if he'd just seen pictures of me at some point. My throat felt tight. I had to resist the urge to just swing a punch at him. But that wasn't what I'd come here for. "I need to talk," I said, my voice low. He regarded me carefully, as though sizing me up. Then he nodded toward the chairs. We sat across from each other in that shabby office. The silence tense, loaded with unspoken truths. I tried to gather my thoughts, but it was like wrangling a hurricane. Finally, I managed a question. "Why her? Why my wife?" He blinked, an uneasy shift in his posture. "Look, man, it's complicated," he muttered. "Emily and I." "Don't say her name," I snapped, a white-hot anger lancing through me. He fell silent. I forced myself to breathe. "I just want to know. How long?" Mark rubbed his face, looking for a moment like a teenager caught in a lie. "A few months," he admitted. He didn't bother defending himself with any moral justification. He didn't say he was sorry. Perhaps he was beyond apologies, or maybe he knew it wouldn't matter. My mind spun. A few months. During those months, how many times had Emily come home to me, looking me in the eye with a sweet, absent smile? I stood, the tension in my body coiled so tight I thought I might snap. Mark rose too, lifting both hands in a gesture of caution. "Look, I didn't plan this," he said. "We met. Things happened. I'm not trying to." "Spare me," I interrupted. My voice shook with rage. I saw his mouth twitch, maybe the start of an argument. "You're not going to defend yourself. Good. Just know this. You've killed something in me. I don't know if I'll ever get it back." His gaze wavered. For a brief second, I caught a glimpse of what might have been guilt, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. People like Mark rarely dwell on remorse. They move through life taking what they want, brushing aside the wreckage. I clenched my fists at my sides. No matter how strong the urge, I wouldn't stoop to violence. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of pressing charges or playing the victim. This was my moment to reclaim my own dignity. And so I forced myself to walk away. At the door, I paused, speaking without turning around. "You should pay the taxi driver you stiffed. He's the one who told me everything." Then I left, letting the door slam behind me. The rush of adrenaline left me shaking as I climbed back into my car. My heartbeat throbbed in my ears. Part of me felt relief. I'd faced the man who shattered my marriage, forced him to look at me, acknowledge me. Another part of me felt the emptiness of it all. There was no grand satisfaction in seeing his face or hearing his confession. The damage had been done. I couldn't rewind time. The best I could do was figure out how to live with it. In the days that followed, Emily tried reaching out to me repeatedly. Texts, calls, voicemails. Some angry, some tearful, some pleading. I ignored them all. I told myself it was for the best. She needed to sit with her guilt, and I needed the space to heal. Besides, I had to finalize arrangements for the ring-shaped monument. The craftsman called to say it was ready. Without hesitation, I told him I'd be there to pick it up. When I arrived, the polished granite loop gleamed under the fluorescent lights of his workshop. My initials JB were etched neatly at the base. I circled it, running a hand over the cold stone. Something about its closed shape spoke to me of endings, of the cyclical nature of betrayal. I paid the remaining balance, loaded the monument into a rented trailer, and drove it to a small clearing behind the old family cabin I'd inherited years ago, the place where I'd grown up fishing with my father, chasing frogs as a boy. No one used it anymore. My parents were gone, and I had no siblings. But the land still belonged to me. It felt fitting to place it there, among the towering pines and scattered boulders. Early morning mist clung to the ground as I stood the ring upright, leaning it carefully against a tree trunk until I could dig out a foundation. The physical labor kept me focused, my muscles straining as I wrestled with the heavy stone. By afternoon, it was firmly set, a silent sentinel in the forest, and with it came a strange sense of closure, like I'd erected a gravestone for the man I used to be. I spent the night at the cabin, building a small fire in the dusty fireplace. The wind whistled outside, bringing back memories of simpler times. I stared into the flames, feeling both hollowed and oddly resolved. Emily's texts kept buzzing on my phone. At some point, I read through them, each one more desperate than the last. "Please, John, let's talk. I'm sorry. I was so stupid. You can't just vanish. Come home. We can fix this. I love you." That last one made my stomach twist. I dropped the phone on the table, burying my head in my hands. It was impossible to reconcile those words with the sight of her pressed against another man, with the phone call from the taxi driver, with the knowledge she'd lied to my face for months. Her attempts at contrition felt like salt in a gaping wound. But I wasn't heartless. Our history weighed on me. A part of me still cared about the woman I'd once believed she was. The cabin's silent walls bore witness as I struggled between hatred and longing. Yet the memory of that ring-shaped stone outside, gleaming with finality, reminded me that some endings are absolute. When dawn broke, I stepped outside to see the monument in the soft light. Its shape was so stark, so calm, like a portal to a world where I didn't exist anymore. My initials glinted in the sunrise. That was the moment I decided how this would end. I'd go home, if only to say goodbye properly. I made the drive back with a sense of grim determination. I arrived at our house in the late afternoon. Emily's car was in the driveway, but somehow the place looked different, more fragile, like a shell whose occupant had fled. I let myself in. She was sitting on the couch, eyes ringed with shadows, hair disheveled. A twinge of pity knifed through me. She stood up the second she saw me, her face a storm of relief, guilt, and uncertainty. I raised a hand to stop her from talking. "I'm here to pack some more things," I said flatly, "and to tell you where I stand." Her lower lip trembled. For the next hour, we walked on eggshells around each other. She followed me from room to room, tears slipping down her cheeks, desperately apologizing. She said it was a mistake, that Mark meant nothing, that she got caught up in something she didn't know how to end. She said she was scared to tell me, that she never wanted to hurt me. Her pleas bounced off me, each one failing to reach the heart she'd so thoroughly betrayed. Finally, in the living room, I set down the box I was holding. "Emily," I said quietly, "I need you to understand something. This isn't just about the act. It's about everything that act destroyed. I thought I knew you. I thought we were a team. But you lied, and you kept on lying." She tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped away. I closed my eyes, mustering the words that needed saying. "I can't give you what you're asking for. Another chance, a shot at forgiveness, because I no longer believe you truly want it. You want to escape the guilt, not repair the damage. And there's a difference." Her sobs cut through the silence. "I do want to fix this," she insisted, voice shaking. "I'll do anything, John." I thought about the ring monument standing out in the forest, about how I'd spent the last few days in a haze of anger and sorrow. "You've done enough," I said, my tone final. "I'm not going to punish you, but I'm not staying. I want a divorce." The word hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. She collapsed onto the couch, face in her hands, her body racked with trembling. I couldn't bear to stand there, so I continued gathering my things, methodically removing parts of my life from the space we once shared. My wedding band felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I'd taken it off days ago, setting it on the motel nightstand, but I'd slipped it into my pocket out of some perverse sentimentality. As dusk fell, I stepped outside with the last of my bags. She followed me to the porch, still crying, but I saw a flicker of realization on her face. She understood that no matter what she said now, the die was cast. "John," she managed, her voice raw, I never wanted to lose you. I paused at the threshold. "Yet here we are," I replied. My voice cracked, betraying the pain behind my steely composure. She reached for me, but I turned and walked to my car, tossing the bags in the trunk. I glanced back once, saw her standing in the doorway, and then started the engine. The headlights cut through the evening gloom as I drove away. In the days and weeks that followed, I moved into a small, bare apartment on the other side of town. The floors creaked, the paint was peeling, but it was mine, separate from her. Each night, I wrestled with anger and regret. I wondered how life had taken this turn. I found a divorce lawyer, began the paperwork. Emily texted me now and then, but the messages grew sparser when she realized my resolve wasn't wavering. I filed for legal separation, then formal divorce proceedings. There was no grand drama, no shouting matches in the courtroom, no fights over petty assets. The real battles were fought in the lonely spaces of my heart as I questioned everything about my past. Sometimes I found myself driving at odd hours, winding up at the old cabin. I'd stare at that ring of polished granite, my initials etched in stone. It was a testament to the end, but also a strange beacon that kept me focused on the future. If this loop was closed, maybe there was another path waiting for me. Over time, the initial shock and fury settled into a dull ache, a permanent bruise on my soul. But I discovered that bruises heal. On some days, I could almost forget the sound of Mark's voice, or the sight of Emily's body pressed to his under neon lights. Then something would trigger the memory, an old song on the radio, a glimpse of a couple dancing on television, and the wound would flare up again. But each time, it hurt a little less. The final hearing arrived on a cold, drizzly morning. Rain tapped against the courthouse windows as a judge dissolved our marriage in a few curt sentences. Emily and I stood side by side, strangers bound by bureaucratic formality. When it was over, she looked at me one last time, eyes shimmering with sorrow. But we said nothing. I walked out into the rain, letting its chill numb my face. In the parking lot, I paused, glancing up at the leaden sky. A memory flickered. Emily's laugh echoing in a bustling club, her smile bright as strobe lights danced across her features. My heart tightened, but the weight was different now, lighter, as though I'd finally exhaled the last breath of our shared life. And in that moment, I understood something crucial. Revenge wasn't about hurting her in return. My real revenge had been to free myself from the lie, to bury the past under that ring of stone, to walk forward unshackled. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and pulled onto the street. A sense of quiet finality settled over me. The city rolled by in a blur, but inside I felt a calm that had eluded me for months. I had no illusions that everything was magically healed. I'd be carrying scars for a long time. Yet, for the first time in ages, I felt like my life was mine again. Driving away from that courthouse, I realized I didn't need to see Mark Hensley ever again. I didn't need an apology or an admission of guilt. I didn't need anything from Emily beyond the truth, and even that was no longer my concern. My eyes flickered to the side mirror, half expecting ghosts to cling to the edges of my vision. But there was nothing, just a rain-slick road stretching out behind me. I decided to visit the cabin once more. When I arrived, the pines loomed in the gray drizzle, their needles glistening with water. The rain monument stood where I'd left it, silent and unmoving. The letters of my initials caught the weak daylight. I placed a hand on that smooth granite surface, feeling the cold seep into my palm. I closed my eyes, letting the hush of the forest envelop me. In the distance, a bird cried out, a sharp call cutting through the wet air. For a brief moment, I remembered the phone call that started it all. The taxi driver's raspy apology for the late hour, the mention of a woman who looked like my wife, the distant murmur of Mark's voice calling her name. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet the sting was still vivid. But here, amidst the tall trees and quiet solitude, I felt that sting begin to fade. The circle of betrayal was complete, sealed in stone, and I was finally stepping outside it. Turning away, I made my way back to the cabin. The door creaked as I pushed it open. I lit a fire, just as I had before, letting the warmth spread through the old space. The logs crackled, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. I sat in an armchair, staring into the flames, letting them burn away the remnants of my rage. If Emily was out there somewhere, alone in our old home, I hoped she was learning her own lesson about consequences. Maybe she'd move on, find happiness or heartbreak anew. It was no longer my burden. And so it went. The quiet hush of the cabin, the soothing crackle of fire, and me, alone, yet strangely at peace. The ring monument stood outside as a testament to a hurt so deep, it forced me to reorder my entire life. I felt the weight of what I'd lost, but I also felt the faint flicker of what I might gain. Perhaps tomorrow, or the next day, I'd leave the cabin and start fresh somewhere else. I could sell the house, maybe even sell this property. Or I might keep it, a place to retreat whenever the memories threatened to overwhelm me. In that moment, I realized with startling clarity that my revenge had never been about destroying Emily. It was about reclaiming myself, about refusing to remain locked in a cycle of betrayal and resentment. I had faced her, faced him, faced the black pit of my own despair, and I had survived. Maybe I wasn't the same man who once believed in the unshakable foundation of love and fidelity, but I was still here, breathing, fighting, feeling, and that was enough. The night deepened, and I drifted to sleep in the armchair, warmed by the dying embers. In my dreams, the club lights flickered, the bass pounded, but when I turned, there was no Emily, no Mark, no haunting image. Just me, standing under a strobe that pulsed like a heartbeat, unbound from the illusions I'd carried for so long. When I woke at sunrise, pale light filtered through the dusty windows. I stretched, my muscles stiff. The fire had gone out, leaving a faint trail of smoke. My breath mingled with the cold air. Outside, birds were singing. The ring of granite waited, a patient sentinel in the clearing. Everything felt raw, but also oddly alive. I stepped outside, letting the brisk morning air clear the last cobwebs of sleep from my mind. With each breath, I realized there was life after betrayal. An uncertain, open-ended life, but life nonetheless. The ring monument was my witness, a silent vow that I wouldn't be defined by someone else's disloyalty. I ran a hand over my face, drawing in the forest scents, pine, damp earth, distant water. A sense of renewal washed over me. My life had looped back on itself, the way I had always feared. But now, stepping beyond that circle, I found a new beginning. And for the first time in far too long, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile.